March is considered National Kidney Awareness Month, and I cannot tell you enough how that has impacted not only my life, but my little family's life. Back in, I want to say 20, 20, around the time that Ezekiel was born to the time that, Alonzo started daycare. We had no idea. We had no clue that he was sick. And why Kidney Awareness Month is important to us is because he is a little nephrotic ninja warrior. And that's what I named this episode. So this episode goes out to my son. The kidneys, I had no clue how well I did, but I had no clue how important their function was until we broke it down and we went in depth with what Alonzo was going through. So I'll start off from the beginning. Alonzo was very active. His babyhood to what he is today, almost 6. Oh my God. Um, he developed normally. He didn't have any issues that we were aware of. So every developmental stage where we took him to the family doctor, he was considered healthy. He was hitting his milestones. He was basically in our family doctor's eyes, he was considered an actual healthy child. However, we continued. Obviously, the process of parenting is super new to us because Alonzo was our first child. Alonzo um, and we had some difficulty starting off from the beginning with breastfeeding and things like that. Obviously, I was a new mom and I had no, like, it was a huge ballpark moment for me because I had no idea what was going on. I had no guidance. And I mean, you know, looking back at it, if I had my mom there, I wasn't fully paying attention, but at the same time, I wanted to do it myself. So watching him grow was normal to me. Watching him hit his milestones was normal to me. So now, when we ventured into the world of daycare, he he had no chance. Let's just put it that way. He had no chance. So this is why I say nephrotic syndrome was such a hard diagnosis for me. One, because I had gone through my own things, and two, no parent wants to face the emotions from 100 or from 0 to 100, real quick, because you want to be protecting your child at all times. So he has had such, like I said, such a tough from 3 to 6, because he's going to be 6, but from 3 years old to 6, I feel like he has had it tough. And with it being the month, like I mentioned, of kidney awareness, I want you guys to familiarize yourself with the kidney function because we need to protect it at all costs. Now, we don't understand what this might implicate in the future, but I mean, the signs were there. So, one, I'll start off by saying that the actual function of the kidney is to get rid of the toxins, that uh, filter your blood. So anything that needs to leave your system is either done through, obviously, urine, and it regenerates the cycle. So when you're actually looking at it in a way, your blood cells are basically being pushed out of your system through these little tiny sockets that look like jelly beans. And these jelly beans need to be working in all aspects. So Alonzo, he was having some difficulty with the kidneys in what they call the glomeruli, and I'm pretty sure I'm butchering the name. The glomeruli are what motor the waste. So it basically, think of it as a floating Cheerio in a bunch of Cheerios and milk. So you know how it's floating around and it's just trying to figure out a way where it needs to go next. So that was my son's biggest issue. And before I get into all that other specific detail, I'm going to go back to how we recognized something was internally wrong and how we came about to where he's at today. And I hope, this reaches all the parents out there that are significantly dealing with nephrotic kiddos, because it's hard. Nephrotic syndrome without a diagnosis is one of the worst experiences ever. So basically, when he started daycare, we noticed that a lot of the time he was getting sick, he was getting ill. He was becoming basically a magnet to all of these diseases, and we were just like, where are they coming from? But as a good parent knows, we are expecting this from the beginning. Like, he'll bring home any type of virus and we would all be affected by it. When he got sick, when he got ill, Alonso would basically show symptoms at the daycare like fever, throwing up, or lethargy. Again, venturing into this whole world of parenting, I had absolutely no idea, what to look for, what were the signs to look for. And I'm not going to blame myself. I'm not. But I feel like a lot of them were already pointing that we needed to immediately have, somebody intervene, to the point that we would have missed where he was swelling up and things like that. But I'll explain that in a minute. So when he would come home, we would simply have it as like a simple cold, or he has a virus, and he would be out for days. I mean, I know some kids are out for, I want to say, 5 or 6 days, but Alonzo would be out for like a week and a half. And these were no regular colds, these were no regular fevers. And it got to a point that I think the one time we ended up taking him to the emergency room, they had diagnosed it as pneumonia, and it wasn't. And he was prescribed, I believe, the 7 days of antibiotics, which absolutely didn't work. Um, and it got frustrating after that, because we would continue to bring this up and nobody would be paying attention to us. So in one of his bouts, this would be basically, so we would take him out of the daycare when he was sick, and we would ask, my father-in-law or my mother-in-law at the time, if they were able to watch him. But he would progressively get worse. So until we as parents, my husband and I, started thinking, the worst is about to happen to us, we didn't put an urgency on anything. And that was the biggest thing. We should have, but we didn't put an urgency on anything. Finally, we took him to my family doctor, because he got to the point where he started swelling in and around his face, around his eyes. He had like chubby cheeks. He had some water retention in the abdominal area, and he also had some water retention in the ankles. That trip that day for me was, I needed to know. I needed to know what exactly was going on, because I was done watching him suffer. I was done trying to break a fever with Tylenol and Advil and watching nothing happen. We went. The doctor could see profusely he was swelling, and he's like, no, we need to get him into an ultrasound ASAP. This ultrasound came about, I want to say 3 days after that visit to the family doctor. And shout out to Dr. Clumfus, who actually, At first, he was very skeptical, but then afterwards, he put that sense of urgency on this, and, Alonzo went into the ultrasound. The ultrasounds are too familiar for me. I know what it is to sit there and then pry around and look for that image and just, snap those pictures away, and as soon as that door hit closed and Alonzo was on that bed, I noticed the amount of pictures that this ultrasound tech was taking, and I said, "God, let this be what I think it's gonna be, but at the same time, prepare me and prepare my family for what is to come." He eventually that bout where he had the swelling, he eventually got better. We ended up putting, like, compresses on his face. We ended up giving him water, like, tons of water, and that's something that's gonna come into play in a little bit. Um, he wasn't eating. He's always been considered a picky eater. That's the biggest thing. So he wasn't eating at all, and he was skinny. Of course, once you see your child becoming skinny, you think, "Okay, this is alarming and this is heartbreaking because you have no idea what exactly is going on." I don't know if that day that I was sitting at work eating lunch by myself was supposed to happen. Excuse me as I take a sip of water, but it was supposed to happen. So I got the phone call from him, like the doctor himself. He said, "How is Alonzo doing?" I said, "Great. He's in," I think he was at daycare at that time because I only had him in there for like Tuesdays and Thursdays, I believe. No, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Sorry. Yeah, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And I said he was doing great, that he was there, but the alarm in the doctor's voice was, "No, like, you need to get him down to the emergency room." I got the results back. I can't really say much because I don't know how to interpret the kidneys. You would think as a doctor, all right, you would think as a doctor that somebody would be able to do that, but I guess to each his own. And I'm glad he gave me that sincere um, answer, that he wasn't able to interpret it, and that somebody in the emerge would be better off doing that. But as we all know, sticking yourself in the emergency room, you're there for hours, hours upon hours, and then finally, when you get that one, chance at seeing somebody, they'll tell you right away, "No, it's your average cold, it's your average flu. Here's some medications and go." But because my family doctor had written out a whole entire page of what he thought it might be, the doctors at the emergency room took it a lot more serious. So there is when I said, "This is the time that we're going to know what exactly is happening to my son." Alonzo's always been neutral. Like, he's been a happy-go-lucky kid. He's never once complained about his health. Yes, he would say, "Mommy, I'm tired. Yes, mommy, like I think, this is what's going on." But he was never complaining this whole entire time this was happening to him. We finally got brought back, and I think we ended up waiting there a couple hours more. Meanwhile, this was post-pandemic, so a lot of the restrictions were still happening in the hospital, and I know that a lot of the staff was still understaffed. So when we finally saw an emergency doctor come into our unit, he basically said that I would have to reread everything that Dr. Klumpus had written down for us, for the doctor to reevaluate him. And then he would come back and just kind of give us the lowdown. So probably 15 minutes go by, and the doctor comes back and he says, "Hey, you know what?" Again, another doctor that couldn't interpret this by himself. "Because I'm not a pediatric doctor, I need to put this on the pediatric doctor that's on call today." And let me tell you, when he said that, my face went pale. My stomach turned. I was like, "Okay, here we go." this is going to be something that is going to change our life, and I need to be prepared for it. I need to be prepared for my son. I had gone through it with my bout of cancer. I am here for my son. Again, waited another 15-20 minutes. Then Dr. Purser ended up coming into our unit. He is the pediatric, I guess one of the best pediatric doctors here in the Tri-Cities. He saw Alonzo right away and basically said, no, this kid has nephrotic syndrome. What nephrotic syndrome was, when he mentioned it at the time, I had no clue. And again, this is why it's important to be aware of, and I'm not saying go open a book, go study the organs of your body, but this is the importance of understanding how your body works. I asked doctor what exactly this was, and he asked me how long had this been going on. So I ended up telling him, that we had been taking him to Cambridge Memorial, and that we had been taking him back and forth from McMaster because we were unsure. Like, he was so sick to the point that we were unsure if Cambridge would be able to do anything. But when I was explaining to him that he would get sick, that he would then basically puff up in the face, that he would puff up in his abdomen and in his ankles, he knew. He's like, yeah, no, there's something wrong with your son's kidneys. Your son's kidneys are not properly functioning, and we need to do testing immediately. Therefore, you are staying as we do these tests here at the hospital. Finally, a mother's prayer was actually answered, and I for one was scared, but also alleviated, because I was able to put my son under people's care that I know could help him better than what I was doing, or what my husband was doing, or what my family was, insinuating what was wrong and what they were trying to do to help. We got into the pediatric unit. We were basically not isolated, but at that point, we weren't sure if he needed to be isolated. When we were admitted the first time, we had to do blood testing, and we had to do urine testing, and not the ultrasound, because the ultrasound had gone straight to him, and it was recently done. So blood and urine. The two biggest things with the kidneys, if you're peeing out blood, or if you're peeing out like foamy urine, that's an indication of something's up, something is wrong. And the blood was more so to count, basically, and now that we've gone through it for all of his 6 years, or from 3 to 6, his blood work was basically to see the elevation, albumin. So what I want to say is, they wanted to monitor his albumin. Albumin is a protein that it basically transfers in the body, but you lose through through the urine. My son was losing all of it, considerable amounts, and that is why the waste was accumulating in my son's body. That's why you were seeing my son puff up in the face, puff up in the abdomen, puff up in the ankles. I know I'm going to be repetitive, but I need you guys to hear me out. We immediately had to start what they called a steroid treatment. This steroid treatment was supposed to stunt the kidneys in a way that they weren't going to freeze, obviously, the mechanism, but they wanted to see if steroid treatment would have an impact on this. Steroids are no joke, okay? Steroids come with a price. And if you do not have a benefit plan that covers them, it can add up. So we started that almost immediately. When we entered, that was the first time, the hospital, that was the first time that my son had ever got anything done. Blood work was one of the most chaotic scenes ever in my entire life that I've ever seen. And holding him down the way I did, I feel so bad to this day. And if he's able to listen to these podcasts, I'm so sorry, but I never meant to hurt you in any shape, way, or form. But holding him down because he would not stay down. Obviously, what kid would stay down? If he saw a needle coming at him just to, take blood work. He was beyond himself, crying, and finally we were able to get blood work done that stay, and then obviously peeing in a cup was a different story. I don't know. I don't remember how I did it. I don't know why we did it, but I know for a fact that he found it fun at age 3 to pee in a cup. And what boy doesn't do that, right? What boy doesn't find that fun? That is where, okay, that is where I noticed the discoloration in his urine. I said, "Holy crap." I had no idea. No idea. And that's when things start to play in your head, right? You start saying, "Well, why didn't the teachers in the daycare, or why didn't I, or why didn't my husband, or why didn't anybody for that matter see what exactly was happening?" What I remember was dark urine in his pull-up, or okay, not so much that it was dark, but you could see there was a considerable discoloration in his pull-up, and I didn't think anything of it. Again, maybe I hadn't, cleaned up after him properly, whatever the case was, or the daycare didn't have, have cleaned him properly. Um, but that started making sense. And also the whole matter of, washing his hands, or in fact, being with people who were sick. That's what almost killed him. And I'm not being sarcastic. It literally almost killed him, because your defense mechanisms when it comes to your kidneys, your immune system is low. You've lost all this basically albumin protein, and your white cells jump or lower. It was so totally chaotic, and I finally was able to put that together when it came to, what the daycare was letting us know when he was ill. With the steroids, they forewarned us that, one, steroids cause, obviously, inflammation when used in excess. So he would basically, you would see, I forget what the term is called, but you would see, um, later on in the treatment, that he would have chunky cheeks, is what he calls it. He goes, "Mommy, why am I chunky?" every time I show his picture. And the other one that they attributed to steroids is that his appetite would be crazy. He ate like no tomorrow. That was really the time that I was like, finally, my kid is eating. And finally, I don't know what I'm going to feed my kid, and if I have enough money to feed my kid. That and the clothes. The clothes that we had for him, because he was so skinny, were fitting perfectly. But then when he gradually gained the weight, we were like, okay, we need to go shopping. And he was fitting into like 6-year-old clothing at like 3 years old, 4 years old. So we had to push what they called steroids, in steroid injections into his IV line. That was the easiest part, realistically. He would get them, and every single time he would get them, I would say, "Okay, Diosito Santo, this is the time. This is the time that I need you the most again. You haven't let me down before. My son needs you more than ever, and I'm gonna be his advocate for this." I would watch them push those steroids into his IV, and I would be freaking out. Deep inside, I'd be freaking out. I'm like, this kid does not deserve this. This kid does not deserve any type of medication at this point in time. He needs to live. He needs to be a normal child. He needs to live. We got discharged, I want to say the following day, and they gave us what the hospital had of steroids, and we would have to follow up, I believe, in a week or whatever it was. So this was in and around one of the Canada Day weekends. We went home. I had like the bouts of the actual steroids, like the little bottles, and They gave us syringes. Oh, and the other thing that they had mentioned, two things. One, you need to measure your son's urine. So that was something brand new to me that I had to do every single day after this. We had to purchase like the sticks that basically color code, the pH level, the protein, the urea, um, and a whole bunch of other things that are on it that I can't remember at the moment. But the basic ones that I needed to see was if his protein was higher than, I think, zero point 0.5, that means, things were still where they were. But if the steroids would make an impact and it would potentially decrease, the loss of the protein through the urine. And we would want to see that. We would want to see that he would be normal and it would be less than zero point 0.1 or something like that. And that's what they wanted. That's what the pediatrician wanted. And essentially the steroids would be a big impact for the next, I want to say 3 weeks or so. Yeah, three or so weeks. However, we were supposed to go back a week later because Dr. Purser was back in the ER and he was going to basically look at Alonzo and redo the dreaded blood work. And I think he wanted the actual ultrasound at that time just to see what was happening. In between the days that led up to the second visit to the ER, I noticed that with the push of the steroids, Alonzo started swelling up again. But it wasn't the regular swelling up of the face that we've seen before. This was something totally new. And let's just say the lower half of my son's body, I know this is too much information, but let's just say the lower half of my son's body also ballooned up. I didn't call anybody. I didn't say anything. I think it was the long weekend, obviously, or the long weekend was approaching, but I didn't say anything. I didn't say anything because, again, me not being straight-minded or trying to understand what exactly, again, we were going through, because, again, something that's so frustrating to understand is that we just went through one health scare. We're going through a second one within the span of, I want to say, like a year or so. So this swelling after the steroids were being pushed into his system made him swell up even more. Where that day of the actual follow-up, we came back to Dr. Purser, and Dr. Purser, one look at him and he's like, no, back upstairs you go. You guys are staying, and this time you're not staying for a day. You're staying for 3. I got scared. I had no idea if this was basically what they were going to tell me, but I was thinking, okay, my son's kidneys are failing. He has no function in the kidney, and now I'm freaking out because I remember texting everybody in sight saying, you know what, if you're a match, please consider it, because at this point I had no idea what was going on. So again, trying to be a proactive mom, I looked up what nephrotic syndrome was on Google, and Google basically sums it up of many symptoms that you don't understand why, the kidneys are doing what they're doing. But my cousin back home, who's also a doctor, she deals with these cases, on the daily. And I said to her, Prima, I said, this is something serious. Like, I need all the help I can get. I don't know. I have no idea what I'm going through. And that's when she said, you know what? The kidneys are his biggest thing right now. They are not working properly. And that's the why you're there. That's why you're at the hospital. His kidneys are not working properly, and we need to figure out why. I said, can we figure out why? She's like, of course we can. Of course we can figure out why. But you got to be patient with it. You got to understand that this is not something that from night or day they'll tell you what exactly it is that you need to do. This is something that will take some time to evaluate and examine, and they'll give you the process of what's next. So again, 3 days in Cambridge Memorial Hospital. We went through more steroids, more blood work. But this one was new to me. Alonzo needed a blood transfusion. He needed an albumin transfusion because he was so low. His numbers were pretty bad, and I had no idea what that entailed. And for once in my life, I think I was actually able to cry a little bit and just say, God, like, you got to let me know what it is I need to do. And that's when the doctor came in. And at this point, Purser, the pediatrician, had called in a nephrologist from McMaster University, or in this case, McMaster Kids. He had given her all the information of Alonzo's diagnosis, and we were trying to piece it, piece it, piece by piece, and understand what it is he was going through. But yeah, the transfusion was one that hit me, and I remember messaging my cousin again, hey, they're saying that he needs this transfusion now. And she said, yes. She's like, you know what? The best thing that you can do is say yes. This is what's going to get his counts back up. And they need to administer a diuretic, because that was the other thing. He was still swollen. So he was retaining all this water, and we needed to get it out of him. So this diuretic would basically help him pee it out. I think we weighed him in at, I want to say, 28 pounds with the water weight, because he wasn't yet 30 pounds. So I want to say roughly 28 pounds. But with the water weight in his system, like, that's what made him look a little bit bigger, a little bit heftier. Once the transfusion started going, they pushed the diuretic. And that night, I remember the urgency for this kid to pee like crazy. I was up every hour on the hour. I was asking him if he needed to pee, if he was thirsty, if he needed mommy to sleep with him. By the morning, so remember, this is all the water that he basically peed out in one night. About 2 to 3 mils of mils of urine that came out of him. It basically just brought out all the waste that needed to come out of his body, the waste that the kidneys were just spreading all over him specifically. And he looked like a different kid. But I tell you, when I saw the difference from the actual transfusion from the and to the diuretic, I knew that we were in for a very long journey, The following day was now the down to the wire. This is what you're going to do until you go to Mac. We all know we want to hear those words. Until you go to Mac. McMaster has never been bad for me. Has never been a situation that I dreaded going. It has never been a situation that I didn't want to face alone, because I did face it a couple of times. And I'm sure my niece is in the back, and I'm sure I want to say, some significant something significant overcoming me, because I knew that McMaster University was the real deal. We were given the name of his nephrologist. She, honestly, I know I talked about somebody being a godsend in my cancer journey, but she is a godsend. She took one look at Alonzo, and she knew right away. She's like, okay, we have to evaluate him, in a sense that he needs to be here. I want to say, like, whenever I call you, basically whenever I say you need to be here, you need to be here. She looked at me. I remember that meeting, or appointment. She looked at me. She said, "Okay, well, what do you know? Break it down for me." Basically told her Alonzo was not drinking more than whatever amount of water they told me, that we were still pushing the steroids. The steroids didn't look like they were working, and that he had some sort of nephrotic syndrome, and that we needed to know what exactly it was that we needed to do next. What was the treatment plan? What exactly was Alonzo supposed to follow? Because that year that all this was happening, he was supposed to go to junior kindergarten, the um, September, I believe, and we had seen her a little bit before that. So she basically broke it down. She said, "Hey, I see a lot of nephrotic kiddos in and around this area, and we have no idea what has brought it on. A lot of the times it's a virus, like a very impactful virus that has brought this on. And, we're able to treat it with the steroids, but your son seems to be steroid dependent. Steroid dependent is not a good thing in my in my words. It's okay, so we failed at one thing. Now what's next?" She wanted to give it a try for the next 2 weeks. I think the max of steroids was 6, and then she wanted to do another 2 weeks with what was called a steroid IV push, which that was sad too. That broke my heart. So she mentioned, because she's thinking he's steroid dependent, we might have to choose a different path with his nephrotic syndrome. And once we knew that those steroid pushes were not successful, we had to immediately go down a different route. And until we got there, he would basically be submitted to routine ultrasounds. Again, more blood work, fun blood work. I think the techs at McMaster University, or at McMaster Children's Hospital, know Alonzo, because he's the one that screams off the top of his lungs. Basically, needs to go poop before they take blood out of him. And I don't know if this kid will ever, that's a trauma of his. I'm sure I'll ask him when he's like 15, 16, "Hey, what are you scared of, mom? Needles?" But those techs definitely know him. And the other appointment that we ended up going to was with a blood doctor. So these are things that are attributed again to the filtering of the blood through your kidneys. Because we had done the transplant, the albumin transplant, they wanted to keep his blood counts at a level that they knew he needed it to be. I think they at one point they were talking about a blood thinner too, if it got is super bad, where he was, for whatever reason, just continuing to lose the protein, with knowing that the steroid treatment wasn't working. Those 3 days of the push were rough, because you had to come prepared. It was basically, and I'm not gonna lie, you were sitting beside cancer patients. You were sitting beside cancer patients, kids with cancer. And that was my first glimpse of my reality through Alonzo's eyes. These kids were there basically, you know, in their norm. And this to me was new, because in my head, my son was all right. The 3 days he got the IV pushes, I had to pack. I had to pack food, because the aftermath of those 3 days were brutal. And he successfully completed all of them, and we had to wait. We went downstairs, we did the blood work, and we had to wait. I don't know. I don't know if silence is always a good thing, but it's going to be something so out of the blue. And again, working full time and knowing that your son is sick is never a great position to be in. We we knew that we were going to end up losing a little bit of income that way, and I for one am the last person that needs to ask anybody for help when it comes to that. But in this case, because Alonzo was going down a route that we had no say over, we needed to continue life, and I'm so thankful that my company was able to give me the opportunity to work from what they call home or remote. They ended up calling us, or the nephrologist's office ended up calling us, and by that time she said, well, unfortunately, he hasn't reacted well to the steroid treatment. He is, in fact, steroid dependent. And, you continue what you're doing, limiting the water, limiting the salt, because that was another big thing, the nutrition for him. Although we try to give him non salty food, the kid is going to eat. Kids are going to eat junk. Kids are going to eat what they want to eat. It was super hard for me just to get some sort of vegetable in that kid that was going to help with his kidney function. And yet they wanted me to reduce the sodium intake. But anyway, she said, continue doing that. But now we're going down a route that we need to do a biopsy, a kidney biopsy. And this kidney biopsy was the last resort. He was probably in school by then. Um, we were masking him up because he was considered an actual liability in a sense. He was sick. That's all I could say. He was sick. And we needed to mask him up so he didn't catch anything that was in school until the biopsy. When the biopsy came, or when the option of the biopsy came, she basically said, this is where we are going to figure out once and for all what is going on with your son. This biopsy is going to be set in, I want to say September, late September. So a little, or maybe a little bit after he started school. And it would be at McMaster Hospital, Children's Hospital, and it would be for like a day. I I took the biggest sigh ever. And she basically said that everything would be all right. Everything would be where we wanted it to be because the next option would be based off of this biopsy. We hit the day of the biopsy. I was not prepared for that. Um, but then again, what parent is prepared for anything? We make it that day. We were sent to the ultrasound first, then we were sent to blood work, and then obviously intake. The time that we waited for this to happen and for everybody else to go through with their own, because I guess it was a busy day of doing biopsies. Alonzo's turn came. He had no idea what was going on, and I remember walking him through those doors, um, through those surgical operating doors. And I said, baby, everything's going to be all right. Mommy's going to be outside. They had put the IV in him. Or no, sorry. They had put the mask on top of him, and I watched my baby go to sleep. Whew. You do never, never in my life did I feel my heart being ripped out of my chest. I wanted I wanted him to be okay. I wanted him to understand that this was happening for his health and for the betterment of his health. And I don't I don't want any mom or parent to ever live that. He he came out. So basically they just did the aspiration is what they called it. They punctured his kidney. They took whatever they needed to out of it, and they would send it out to, I think, a clinic in Boston. Because nephrotic syndrome is more pronounced than in America. In the United States, they do have clinics where they actually are able to, examine the function of the kidney and understand what exactly nephrotic syndrome is. It's kind of like ovarian cancer in a sense, where ovarian cancer, they're still trying to figure out what kind of testing there is out there in order to prevent, you know, um, any early type of diagnosis or late diagnosis. Nephrotic syndrome in the States, they have their Mayo Clinic, they have their doctors, they have their specialists, and they've seen all types of nephrotic syndrome diagnosis. And Canada, I don't know what it is, but anyway, the biopsy results were sent out to the States, and they were able to do whatever they needed to do. But in the meantime, that was happening. Alonzo would basically go back to school. However, we proceeded with what they call tacrolimus. Tacrolimus is a drug. You, from what I read, it's a drug used when you're transplanting a kidney, right? So it neutralizes it. Its defense, the kidney's mechanisms basically decrease. So we were going back to basically pushing medication into him that we thought might actually work, and it was. The only thing was, these bottles are astronomically high because it's a compounded drug. My son that needs this compounded drug, they're charging me, I want to say, anywhere from like $60 to $100, and it goes up there. The price goes up there when you don't have benefits. These bottles, every time that we need to renew them, these bottles like, they're huge, they're massive, but they come with a specific amount of medication, compounded medication in it, and that's what we need to be administering every 8 hours. So he'll take it at 8 o'clock in the morning, and then when he goes to bed, 8 o'clock at night. Excuse me. So we were in the beginning processes of the tacrolimus when he came out of that biopsy. I was still measuring the urine. We were still obviously giving him the tac, like I was saying, and we were at this point we were okay to basically up his dosages or his liquid. So he was considerably, normal in a sense, but we were noticing that this tacrolimus was actually working. I did not know what to expect the day after the biopsy. Obviously, we weren't there for what was good news. Obviously, we were there to figure out what essentially would be bad news in my head. So we continued on, and at some point in all this, mom and dad, so myself and my husband, we were also being subjected, or we agreed to an actual blood test, kind of like a DNA blood test, but wanted to see if Alonzo, mom or dad, had some sort of genetic correlation of this nephrotic syndrome. Because again, that's something that they do. They basically go down the genetics just to see if, it skips a generation, or if in fact, this is a fluke, whatever the reason. We submitted ourselves to that blood work, and what came back was surprising. This was in between the time we were waiting for the biopsy results to come back. But my husband ended up testing positive, well, positive, but for the same genetic mutation that causes his type of nephrotic syndrome. Complete and utter shock, obviously. My husband's like, I had never, ever once complained. I remember him calling his mom. I have never, ever once complained about, functions with my kidney for whatever reason. And he's almost 40. So he's basically lived with us through his entire life, where Alonzo, it showed early. So now that we knew it was correlated, we didn't think that, or I guess the nephrologist knew that it wasn't something that was brought on by like a virus or anything. It was just, that genetics wise, we had something to fall back on. But between that time and until we actually got the results back, um, we still were to continue the way we were continuing with Alonzo's treatment. And lo and behold, obviously this was a key factor into what was happening with him. When a little bit before we got the biopsy results back, Alonzo had reached what they call remission. So three of the urine sticks tested back to back were normal. They had zero protein. The blood, because it was tracing blood in the protein too, had zero blood in it. And she was happy. The nephrologist was happy to hear that. I remember snapping pictures and sending them to her nurse, Jackie, which again, shout out to Jackie because she's put up with Alonzo a lot. And she was super happy with it. And then fast forward to when the biopsy results came, Alonzo has what they called, and I'm going to butcher this name, glomeruli. Glomeruli. No, basically his glomeruli, like the little motors, like I was saying at the beginning, they're inflamed. So they weren't able to kind of process, like work like a mechanism, like a machine in order to filter out what they needed to filter out. Glomerulonephritis. There you go. Glomerulonephritis. And because they were so inflamed, that's what was causing him to lose the albumin protein. That's what was causing him to swell up. And basically bring down his defense mechanisms. And that's what essentially caused him to be the way he was. I have never in my life been thrown into the lion's den as much as I have with everything that's happened in my life. But when we finally figured out what his actual nephrotic syndrome was, I just kind of, you know, sighed and said, okay, this is a chronic condition. Like, this is not going away. It will never go away. Alonzo will be living with this for his rest of his life. Uh, I wanted to say, at least we had a peace of mind of what it was that was happening inside him. But now, if you look up glomerulonephritis, I'm not going to say it's bad, but I'm just hoping for the best, because if my husband is able to live with this or that genetic mutation for all his entire life, I'm hoping Alonzo can too. The the tacrolimus has worked to a point where we are 2 blood draws away from knowing if his levels are basically what they call below 2. We are able to pull him off that medication. And he will somewhat live a normal life. However, that's going to come with a price. I already know that. There's so much to be worried about, but there's also so much to want life to continue as normal. He is such an amazing kid. He is my little ninja warrior. All he's known, all he's known is, that he's been sick and that he has an issue. And every time I see his back where his biopsy was done. When I see it, I know that this attributes to everything that I've been saying since the beginning of all these podcasts. Our life is a testimony. His life is a testimony. And from April down to August, because August I think is the last one that we have to go to. If in fact they say, okay, he needs to stop, I will consider that a victory. But at the same time, I am guarding myself. I am trying to understand that in his growing years, this could change. And I'm going to be more proactive about it now that I've seen the symptoms, been through the story, been through the trauma, been through my son's trauma, um, and just kind of be proactive and ready for any scenario that's to come. And I can tell you this, there are so many of these kiddos out there that there are groups that you can join. If in fact you are going through the same situation with the nephrotic syndrome, there are groups out there and you will find a lot of the same situations, a lot of the same scenarios that have happened with these kids has happened with yours. So with that being said, I just wanted to give a huge shout out to all the nephrotic parents or anybody that is actually dealing with kidney failure situations. This is your month. This is your month to push the awareness part of everything. And if you're able to, and I'm not saying again that you need to open a book or read it or test yourself on it, but if you're able to and you're willing to understand the function of your kidneys and what is best and how to protect them, I suggest that you do. And for anything, if you know it's wrong, if you see that it's wrong, get it checked out. You never know what exactly it is going to happen. And I don't tell our stories for granted because I know, like I said, I know a lot of us have similarities when it comes to nephrotic kiddos. And I just wanted to say that my little ninja warrior, he will be that little ninja warrior until, you know, we say that everything's in the clear and until everybody, whether it be his nephrologist or his team back at McMaster Kids Hospital, say, you know what, we're okay. Like, come back in the next year or so, then you know that he's overcome a lot. Um, I'm super happy that I was able to share this with you guys. And until the next time, I wish you guys all the best. Happy week. Enjoy the loss of sleep. I know not a lot of us are going to, but remember, those clocks go back an hour or front, whatever tomorrow. So don't forget about it. Much love to you all. Take care.